Hello, and welcome to episode 6 of the Catcher's Corner. I'm Eric Samulski, joined as always by my co-host Sammy Ackley. Sammy, how you doing?
Oh, just dandy.
En-
Just
enjoying a, enjoying a Kenta Maeda performance.
well, at least I've got Vladdy hitting me 2 home runs off of Scherzer tonight to kind of balance out the pitiful pitching performance today by Kenta Maeda. But it's going well. Besides that,
That's true. I know it's early in the year, but I'm close to taking my L on. I'm not sure that Vladdy can change his swing.
we keep going back and forth on this, bro. I keep telling you, man.
Listen,
Like it's 22.
listen,
Like
I
this.
stand by that it's a harder thing to change a swing than everybody thinks. But it looks like he's making those adjustments. So I'd love for him to be good. So I hope it sticks.
Yeah, man.
And we've got another guest this week. We're joined by Mike Kurland. Mike, what's up?
Nothing much, man. Always happy to be on. Thank you for having me. Yeah, Vlad was a guy that I was wrong on because I wanted to wait and see. And
Yeah.
I'm seeing, and I have 0 shares, and it hurts, but I'm happy. This is a happy hurt. This is a happy hurt because I want to see, it's good for baseball when a top prospect hits. You know what I mean? It's good for baseball. It hurts my fantasy teams, but it's good for baseball. And good thing his skill set isn't something I'm lacking in most leagues, so it's not like I'm missing out truly on it. But it's no fun when you don't have any shares of Vlad. So yeah, there's that. But other than that, yeah, everything's good.
Good.
It's also great too when like the kids of former like good ball players like turn into like good players too. It's like it feels like a family thing. Like we see in the NFL, like we see in all sports, but it's also in baseball. Like because we usually see these kids on the field and whatnot most of the time.
Oh, for sure. It would be, and if only Biggio could hit as good as his dad.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But then like I saw a video today of Prince Fielder's son hitting like a massive bomb, and I'm like, I think we got to draw the line somewhere. Like I watched Cecil Fielder play, so seeing Prince Fielder was one thing, but now I got to see Prince Fielder's son, and I just it makes me.
Listen, so I equate it to like when I was in the Marines, I used to meet guys who like their entire family history was based in the military, right? Like their grandfathers, whatever, like they all served. So it's kind of like a passed down thing. I'm assuming it's the same thing here. So
yeah,
seeing Prince Fielder's kids, like
sure,
take batting practice.
Yeah, one day they'll be swinging the lead pipe in the on deck circle, just like their great grandfather.
I never liked the lead pipe thing, but whatever.
Everybody's got their shtick.
Yeah,
yeah. So Mike does many things. He wears many hats. But one of the things we definitely want to chat with Mike about now is actually the pitch mix tracker that he launched this year. But actually, before we dive into that, Mike, you want to just talk to us about what you do, where people can find your work?
Yeah, of course. You can follow me on Twitter at Mike_Kurland. I write for Rotoballer. I help out with Prospects Live on occasion. Like you said, I'm a little bit of everything. I throw up some videos on occasion. I do the solo podcast, the Bases Loaded Pod lately. I just launched a new series of mini pods. So yeah, rubbing my eyes because I'm always tired because I'm always doing stuff.
Yeah, we were talking before this. You and Sammy both doing the fantasy analysis stuff and diving onto podcasts at night while also, being a parent. I can only imagine how tiring that is. And you're also throwing like 4 additional things in the mix as well.
My family hates me.
Right.
And,
you both
my kids don't call me dad anymore. They call me Mike. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. My kid, I manage to balance it. I just don't sleep a lot during the season. And much before, pretty much 9 months out of the year, I don't sleep a lot.
My wife has this like really bad habit of like telling me that I'm going to die early because of my lack of sleep.
That's
killing you. You're not going to bed right now. Oh, okay, you're going to die early. Thanks, bye.
Hey, she loves you, man. That's her way of saying she loves you.
Yes.
She's just trying to keep you healthy.
I know she is.
What do you have life insurance?
Well, most certainly, and I think she's like.
Well, then she shouldn't be mad. Like she should actually be rooting for this.
Damn, that's tough.
Listen, you get the tough love here. But I do, one of the things we did want to ask you, Mike, is probably a question that you asked yourself a bunch of times when you were doing the pitch mix site that you put up, with the SP pitch mix chart, which is why.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because why was the instant question when you just said that, because I realized it's a lot more maintenance than I realized it was going to be, but yeah, it's been a lot of fun in the meantime.
So yeah, what tell us, what went into the decision to make it and why you thought it would be a useful resource for people.
So at least for the first month of the season, which we're coming up to the end of, I thought tracking pitch mixes in velo, especially coming off of 2020, just seemed really like an important aspect to fantasy that people I wasn't sure how much emphasis was going to be put into it. I've seen a lot of people talking about it, so obviously it's a very popular subject, but it's good because we're looking for anything to hold on to in terms of tangible change, in terms of what will stick early in the season. Because, the idea is to grab some of these guys early off the waiver wire, Carlos Rodon, Trevor Rogers, now guys that are universally rostered.
Right.
But these are guys that weren't universally rostered, and had you been tracking their pitch mixes or velos, which again, this chart, it's called the pitch mix chart, but it also tracks velocity changes.
Right.
And stuff like that can give you an idea of maybe someone's more than just a streamer early on. So I thought just on the most basic of levels that I felt like this could just give us an idea of who has some staying power. But then obviously it goes beyond that. Like, okay, so now that we have some staying power, why? It gives us a little bit of why, or how could this work? And then from there, you just kind of have to track it from there, because obviously hitters are going to adjust. How do pitchers adjust? That's why I said the first month, it's more of like a overall look at things. And then obviously from here, we start getting more granular. You look at month to month changes and all that, which I am going to try to get those numbers put into the chart. It's not as easy as I thought it would be, not as difficult as I thought it would be either. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, it's going to get more granular, which turns it into like a whole, it takes it, like I said, a different level. But the idea of the why was just to try to get an idea and maybe an edge early on in fantasy leagues, figuring out which pitchers might have some staying power that we didn't think had any entering the year.
Yeah,
I love this thing, to be honest. It's no, I'm being serious. Like, it's clean, and it's super helpful with the way it's how functional it is.
I have to thank, first off, John Anderson of Rotoballer. He's the brains, like behind the scenes. He helps, like he pretty much created this thing, because I don't have the knowledge of coding. He coded this whole sheet where I press a few buttons every morning and it generates a whole report, and I could just go get the numbers and plug them into the master sheet I have.
Yeah.
And Michael, I think it's Xiang. I hope he doesn't hate me for mispronouncing his last name, but he's the guy who actually created the chart itself and its functionality in terms of being able to search all these things and these certain parameters and the way it lays out. So he's been tremendously helpful with that. So it's been like a team effort. It was just, I came up with the idea, and I had these two guys, very awesome dudes, just help me bring it to life in a more efficient manner than a Google sheet that I was going to do.
Well, kudos to you. Great.
Yeah, appreciate that. And the going back to the why, another reason why was I was sick of looking at pitchers individually. That's honestly, going back to even more of a basic reasoning. Yeah. We all love Savant. This isn't what I'm creating isn't groundbreaking, or isn't oh my God, it's a new stat or anything. It just literally took everything and put it in one place for me. I was sick of looking up pitch mixes for different people, one per page type of thing. So I was I want it all in one spot where I could just look at everything in one spot. And it kind of just turned into what it turned into.
How clean it looks. I feel like Spot can get, there's so much data that it's hard to kind of pull it out of the weeds. You know what I'm saying? Unless you're you're familiar with the site. Your pitch mix chart is just really clean to the eye. And it's like you said, it's just,
I kept it simple.
Yeah, it's easy to use, and all the pictures are right there, and the search function makes it a lot easier also.
Yeah, and it's only starters. That's one part. I considered doing relievers, but then I realized that that's going to mess with the search, some of the search outcomes and all that. Yeah. So when a pitcher makes his first start in 2021, that's when he gets added to the chart. And and when I do add a pitcher, I usually announce it via Twitter.
Okay.
Yeah. And in case anybody hasn't used it, Sammy and Mike are talking about the search function and the just kind of the clean look of it. It is, as Mike mentioned, tracking velo change and pitch mix change. You can sort by change in a pitch mix. So I could type in any pitcher throwing a pitch over 20%, and it pulls up all the pitchers throwing a pitch more than 20%. I could do it with velocity, any pitcher throwing pitches 2-3 miles an hour harder. Or I could just type in a pitcher's name, and I could type in, Danny Duffy, and it will give me just Danny Duffy's information, pitch mix and velo difference. So there's so many different ways to use it. Highly encourage you to check that out if you haven't. And Sammy, let's talk about why it matters. So as a catcher, we keep talking about pitch mix a lot, and he added this, and it adds to his pitch mix, it adds to his repertoire, it adds to his arsenal. We use these terms all the time. Yeah. As a catcher, why does it matter what a pitcher's pitch mix is?
So I think this is like the perfect time to segue into one of these pitchers that we're talking, because we had this conversation I think weeks ago when you dropped Eovaldi. And, even though I can't stand Eovaldi, I kind of changed my mind and picked him up because of the change in the slider usage, right? Like he was predominantly fastball, upper 90s, right? Throwing, I think his breaking ball was like a curveball, or he had like a split, something in that.
Both, yeah.
Both, right? Like, so though the usage of those primary pitches didn't offer enough variation, right? And we talked about how the slider that he's incorporating and upping the usage on that pitch gives him more horizontal tilt, right? Like gets people away from looking in that same tunnel space of where he's throwing those previous pitches, like the sinker and the curveball and the fastball. So the slider breaks away and gives him something a little bit more. So to see him up the usage on that pitch, change the arsenal, we're seeing the success with that change. So it does matter because these are professional hitters, and if you're not throwing in a wrinkle, if you're not giving them something else to look at where they have to worry about a different quadrant of the plate, or if your release point on some of these on your arsenal is giving them the same kind of look, then you're going to have some trouble. And we're seeing it with some guys, and we're seeing how a change in that arsenal can really kind of push them in a different direction.
Yeah. Mike, before we dive fully into Eovaldi, is there a telltale sign for you when you're looking at these pitch mix changes, something that you think is more important and not just noise?
I think it's every pitcher. It depends on the pitcher. You want to look at, because I think we've actually talked about this a little bit behind the scenes, was that not every new pitch is a good thing. Like, what was it? Nola throwing was a cutter, or it was a cutter more, and you see how he's pretty much slowly, but getting rid of it essentially because he realizes it's not a good pitch. So I think that's kind of the big thing, is don't overreact to new pitches because it's not always a good thing. Or sometimes a guy like a Paddock who develops a cutter, now it messes up what it was a good fastball, and he hasn't been able to get feel for his fastball back. So you want to start looking at, like, when I start looking at pitch mix changes, I start looking at, okay, so you mentioned tunneling. I look at, like, how does it help with making him more like elusive to a hitter? Does the new slider go one way because the fastball goes another? Now you see some mirroring going on there. Does it make other pitches more effective, or is he not throwing this pitch effective at all? Is this pitcher leaving it over the zone too much? Is it getting smacked? Is it just like these are things you have to look for. And again, it's very dependent on every pitcher, because you have some guys like Glass now flourishing with a new pitch and Burns flourishing with a new usage of the cutter. But then you have guys like we mentioned, Nola, struggling with a new pitch and probably better off not throwing it.
Yeah. I like that you mentioned the term mirroring. So for people who don't know, obviously when you look in a mirror, right, the thing that you move in the mirror moves in the exact opposite way. So when we're talking about mirroring with a pitcher, we're looking at pitches that move in essentially opposite directions. If I'm throwing a changeup and it moves, if we're using StatCast, they talk about like a negative 45, deviation on the clock, and I have a slider that moves 45, they're moving in opposite ways. We want that mirroring. Pitchers want that mirroring. Sammy and I also talk about a triangle or a tripod, right? Yep. When you're attacking the strike zone, you want to be able to attack the strike zone. If you can't hit all four quadrants, you want to at least make sure you're hitting in a triangle where you have something in the top of the zone, something low and away to righties, something low and into righties. You want to be able to make sure they're not leaning out over the plate for outside pitches. You want to be able to make sure they're not just looking for low pitches. So Mike talked about the idea that not every new pitch is a good pitch, and I've been doing a series for Rotoballer on that as well. And I think it's important to realize that you want pitchers to be highlighting their best pitch. And sometimes you add a new pitch and it doesn't actually serve the best pitches. It can take away from the best pitches. It can do the same thing as the best pitch, or it can do the same thing as another pitch in the arsenal, and it's not actually doing anything different. Or to what Mike just pointed out, which I think is a really good point, right? We know that pitchers mess around with grips. And if you're learning a new pitch and you're playing around with the grip of that new pitch, and that causes you to lose the feel for a previous pitch, that's not something that you automatically just get back. Pitchers can get it back with all that kind of with the reps and practice, but it could also cause a pitch to go away. So Mike, I know Sammy brought up Eovaldi. Are you in on him this year? Do you think that the new pitch mix is leading to something kind of like sticky and substantial, or is it was a hot streak and he'll go back to being, the inconsistent Nathan Eovaldi of old?
Say yes, make me happy. Say yes, make me smile.
Can I just say I don't know? Because I'm looking at Eovaldi's numbers right now, and he's kind of the same guy he was last year, but with better peripherals. So there's more sustainability there. Obviously, he has a 0% home run to fly ball rate. That's going to change. But he actually has a less than league average strand rate. So Eovaldi's a guy that he has some good luck here, bad luck here. The ERA is 3.77, but the FIP and XFIP and all those other numbers are running two runs lower. So you look at that, and that is promising. I think there's a high floor here, maybe a higher floor than we gave Eovaldi for. So I'm not thinking he's going to be this, oh my God, breakout. And then if you look at K- walk, which that's something that actually means something earlier. I can't think of the word I'm trying to say here, but K- walk is something that, we see stabilize early on. And it's 18.5%, which is not bad, but it's nothing special. And it's a little less than last year. And if you look at his K per nine, something as simple as that, it's less than a K per inning. So even though he added the slider, and this is Eovaldi I'm talking about, we're not seeing any added swing and miss to his game really, or in terms of strikeouts anyway. We're seeing better peripherals. So I think there's some give and take here. Ultimately, he's a solid pitcher, a back end of your rotation type, but a guy that I think you could depend on, which is better than what we thought he might be coming into the year. So Eovaldi's a guy that I'm buying in-ish on, kind of in between the two of you. One guy was out, one guy's in. I'm ish.
I mean, I do want to say I was out just to make sure. I was out because I overmanaged and I outsmarted myself, and we were in a 12-team league, and I was like, oh, he gets the Rays and the Yankees. I'm going to drop him, and I'll pick up a streamer, and then I'll pick him back up. And he was great in those games. And Sammy took advantage of me outthinking myself.
That might have been a spite pickup, but that's the perfect way to describe Eovaldi. He's not bad, but he's nothing special. I feel like that encompasses Eovaldi in a nutshell.
And that has value.
Listen, you need those guys, those stabilizers. Absolutely.
It's weird because I just started looking at his peripherals a little better, and he's actually allowing less contact. There's a little more swinging strike. There's swing strike rates up a little bit. CSW's up, so maybe there's a chance for the strikeouts to come. He is getting less chases than last year in terms of the O swing rate. So Eovaldi, there is some possible positive regression in strikeouts, but it's one of those I got to see it first, just because. I don't know, because I'm looking at the CSW is 31.2%. League average is what, about 30? So he's already above average there. So why are the strikeouts not coming? Is he pitching to contact in two strike counts?
I wondered that about Eovaldi.
But you would think with the slider, with a new pitch, it would help. And looks like he's locating it pretty well. I'm just looking at the heat map on that slider, and it just sits on that. It depends on which side you're looking at from the catcher, on the right side, the bottom right.
Mm-hmm.
Man, he's just sitting on. He's just leaving it. He's just hitting a spot there with it. So I don't know. Like I said, I apologize for interrupting, but these are the best swing and miss peripherals he's had, I think, of his career so far. Yeah, they are. So Eovaldi has some strikeout upside, but I really am wondering, and this is something we can go look at maybe with a special search function on Statcast on here, but I'm wondering on two strike counts, does he pitch to contact? Does he not go for the strikeout and just allow hitters, maybe throws them low in the zone, trying to induce ground balls? Something like that to look into, because again, the swing and miss stuff is best it's ever been to this point, with career low contact rates across the board for Eovaldi. So that's why I'm not sure why the strikeouts aren't there.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing for me is, when we started talking about him, I was thinking, Eovaldi really upped that slider usage. And then you actually see it trickling down over the last couple of starts to the extent that in his last start, he actually threw the cutter more than he threw the slider. Early on, he's thrown the slider over 20% in a game, right? The Tampa start, he's thrown the slider 21%. It was over 20% the next start. Now it's down to 13%. The last start, I believe, I'm going to double check it right now. The last start, he actually used the cutter more than the slider. He used identical 13%. The cutter had a 27% CSW. The slider had a 45% CSW. When Sammy and I were talking about at the beginning of the year, we were saying, okay, the cutter, people liked the cutter because it gave differentiation to the four seam, right? He could use the cutter and use the four seam up in the zone. And if he was using the cutter a lot, it made what was already a 97-mile-an-hour fastball play up faster because out of the hand, guys weren't sure if it was the cutter or the four seam. So he did that with the slider, and the slider is, an 88, 89-mile-an-hour pitch. So it's still a hard pitch, and it read similar to the cutter, but it was actually getting swings and misses in its own right. And still on the season, the slider has a 48.1% whiff rate and the cutter has a 26.2% whiff rate. But the last two starts, he's going back to the cutter the same amount or more than the slider. So I don't know if it's a feel thing. Maybe he doesn't feel like he has a good enough grip on the slider. The other thing I'm noticing, you can see immediately looking at StatCast, is he's thrown 60 sliders. 54 of them have been thrown to right-handed batters. He's thrown 57 cutters. 50 of them have been to left-handed batters. So if we went back through the lineups of the last two starts, there's probably, I would imagine, going to be far more left-handed hitters. And to me, that signals a little bit of a problem. If you're going to stop throwing what is currently your best whiff pitch in lineups that feature lefties, and instead you're going to substitute a pitch that got hit pretty hard last year and doesn't really get as many whiffs, you're going to be a worse pitcher when you're facing lineups that stack left-handed bats against you.
Can we Nate Eovaldi in this? Yeah, stop throwing the cutter, throw the slider.
Although he has thrown a curveball 71 out of 90 times against lefties, and it's been playing up very well now. He's been overperforming with it, obviously. If you look at the XBA, the XWOBA, everything about, I lied, the XWOBA, the XWOBA, okay. Wrong. See, remember how you mentioned StatCast? The slider and the curveball were meshing together here, but the curveball itself, he has overperformed with the curveball quite a bit in terms of the production. So maybe once that starts getting hit around, he goes back, but the slider, he has some regression the other way due. So I don't know. There's a give and take here. He gets good whiffs with the curve. Eovaldi does. So I don't know. But then I was looking at the movements. I thought, thinking to myself, a cutter and a slider, how much different can they be? And the cutter almost is like a fastball. It's almost straight. There's not much. It's not much in terms of like a vertical horizontal movement, but then you have the slider. It's almost like a sweeping slider in terms of like you get the drop and you get decent drop, nothing fancy. But you get some good break to it. I don't know. It's not a sweeping slider. Oh, I'm looking at what the heck happened to my movement? Oh my goodness, I'm all over the place with this stuff.
The slider is, it gets more horizontal movement than the cutter. It's a good, Sammy and I watched some video of it early on. I think it's a good slider. It's not that sweep. It's not that sweeping pitch. And that's part of, because he throws it like 80, like I was mentioning, like 86 miles an hour, 85.1 currently. And the cutter is much harder at 93. But I like that differentiation. I think that's important. I think when you're throwing a 97-mile-an-hour fastball, if you have a hard slider that's at 86 and doesn't have ridiculous break, but is kind of a hard, sharp break, I think that adds the variation that you're looking for, as opposed to another hard, fast cutter.
I was wrong about the sweeping motion. I was mixing up this is all over the place. I found it though, and yes, the horizontal movement on it gives you a good break to it. Not much of a sweep. I apologize. I want to make sure I get that right for anyone listening.
If you asked me 2 weeks ago or a year ago, would I spend this much time talking about Eovaldi, I would tell you you're a crazy person.
Yeah.
I just think it's fascinating.
Yeah, no, it's definitely really interesting stuff there.
And I think it's also important to to have people understand that, like, this is a 31-year-old pitcher, so it's a veteran, so it's not some young kid who's just figuring it out. He is adding back in a pitch, right? He hasn't really thrown the slider since 2018, because he had it in 2019, but he barely used it. And he's adding back in the pitch. And just because it's successful early doesn't necessarily mean it's going to stick forever. He's still tinkering with things. He's still figuring out his approach. And I think we also need to keep our eyes on that as we go through into the next couple weeks, months of the season. Is like, things are going to change still, and not just in performance, but also in the effectiveness and the use of a pitch, which leads me a little bit to the next guy we're going to talk about, who also added in a slider this year, or a slutter as he called it. Which a slutter, because it's a slutter because it's a slider cutter.
And that was out of his mouth. That was out of his mouth.
Yes, I would never.
I love Tyler Glasnow. He's so great.
Yeah. So, Mike, are you a believer in this pitch? Do you think it has a meaningful impact on who Tyler Glasnow is as a fantasy arm?
As long as Glasnow can sustain in terms of like the 35.8% whiff rate, but I don't know. I'm looking at it, it gets hit hard. I think that's the problem when if he leaves it over the middle a little more than we'd like. I'd say I'm looking at the heat maps, and I don't think he knows where it's going half the time. But that's the only issue with it. It's we know the curveball fastball combo will do its job. If this pitch could just remain even like a league average third pitch, we know that that'll take Glasnow's that'll take him up a level. It'll make him an ace. Like, he was always missing the third pitch. That's what everyone complained about every year with Glasnow. We need a third pitch. I think the slutter is that third pitch. But again, it's fantastic in terms of like you're looking at some of like the stats. WOBA, the X WOBA is a little high, but it's because it gets hit hard. The slug is 400, but the X slug is 513. So he's been even a little lucky with it. But again, when he hits his spots with it, it seems untouchable. He just doesn't always hit his spots. But isn't that what Glasnow is? Doesn't he just do that? Like, he can look electric, but when he misses a spot, he can get hit hard. Like, I feel like that's normal.
I think we see that a lot of pitchers, right? Like, if they just leave it, if they're leaving it over the plate, it's going to get hit hard. But
that's any pitcher, of course. But
I mean,
but
like,
this one in particular.
Yeah, I watch it though when it's on, dude. It's doing that thing that we were talking about. It gives it that wrinkle that he's already throwing 98 to like 100. And he's putting you off with a curve, and then he's throwing you that insane slider that breaks right across the plate. I've watched it. I think it's definitely something, like you said, Eric. He's just going to tinker with it as he keeps moving forward.
Yeah, I think to Mike's point, the contact part of it is probably the most interesting to watch, because he doesn't need it to be a whiff pitch. Right? He doesn't need it to be a strikeout pitch. That curveball is phenomenal. He obviously has the velocity on his fastball, and you can see, like, again, super early on. But his K percentage isn't drastically different than it's been in the past. It's ridiculous. It's 39.7, and his K minus walk rate is 31.9, and that's tremendous. And part of the reason for that, I think personally, is that to me the slider is a more effective strike pitch than his curveball is. I've seen him throw the slider consistently for a strike when he's behind in the count, or 2-2 in the count, more than the curveball. The issue, and that's the dance that he's going to have to learn, which Mike is talking about, is like, now that he has a breaking pitch that he can throw over the plate for a strike, what is kind of like just a get me over slider that's going to get crushed, and what is a confident strike pitch but maybe in a part of the zone that isn't going to get hit hard. And he maybe has to learn how to throw it for a strike, but not leave it over the center of the plate.
My thing about Glasnow is he's never really needed that type of command of his pitches before, because his stuff is so electric. His delivery allows it to kind of creep up on hitters a lot. He gets that extension on his pitches. So Glasnow's not a guy who's ever needed to be extra, like, have that command or have that control of his pitches. He used to get by with just throwing gas and having nasty breaking stuff. And I still think he can get by doing that, because he has now a third pitch that can just do that. But it still is concerning, because if it's off here and there, if he doesn't have a feel for it, it's just going to be very hittable, it looks like. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, 46 strikeouts. He's only gotten 4 of them on that slider. So he may be using it, like you said, as a get me over, kind of just get a strike, get him in the count or whatever it is. and then using the fastball and the curve as a put away pitch.
And to me, I think that this raises his floor is the way I look at it. I don't necessarily think like, oh, this makes Tyler Glasnow like a top 5 starter in fantasy. But what I do think it does is like if one of those breaking pitches is off, I think it gives him another pitch that he can rely on. So I think you're going to see fewer bad Glasnow starts than you did in the past, where all of a sudden, the command was off. He's walked 7. He's out of there in 2+ innings because he just is throwing way too many pitches. His worst start of the year was his last start against Toronto, who's right now currently thumping Max Scherzer. So, again, we know that team can hit, but he walked 2. He struck out 10. He gave up 5 hits. He just gave up 2 home runs. So that's not like Glasnow was all over the place.
Right.
He a couple of guys made him pay. So I feel more confident in Glasnow with the slider than I did when he was just throwing 2 pitches.
Oh, of course.
Since I did mention Glasnow might not be a top 5 starter with the slider, let's talk about a definite top 5 starter, which is Shane Bieber. So Bieber, who was arguably, many people had him as the number 2 fantasy starter coming into the year. He's now upped his slider usage by 16.7% and abandoned his cutter, which now he doesn't really throw at all. Sammy, do you think this solidifies him as a number 2 arm? Does it not really matter? Does it just make him a fantasy ace and we should love it? What's your take on this change by Bieber?
Don't fix what ain't broke. I mean, like the guy, it doesn't matter what he's doing. He's going to be outside of DeGrom and Cole. He's right. I think he's right there with Cole. But it doesn't do anything for me. Like to me, you're still drafting him where you're drafting him. You're still drafting him as you're the ace of your staff. So I mean, it's nice to see him throw the slider more, but to me, it doesn't really change anything in the way I look at him.
That's yeah. You've pretty much hit the nail on the head. There's not much time to spend on Bieber because Ace is going to ace, and he's gonna. I mean, if he thinks the slider is going to work better for him than the cutter, I trust him. I'm not gonna break down a guy that I completely buy into and believe in at this point.
Right. Yeah. Like aces are going to ace, exactly like you called it, Mike.
Yeah, and I think, listen, the cutter wasn't a great pitch for him last year, so getting rid of it and adding a slider that is pretty good will only make him better. I know there were some people, and I was one of them heading into last year. I wasn't fully bought in before last season, and
you're a home. Please, Eric.
Listen, yes, I was overly skeptical, and I think I just bought into the bad fastball narrative that followed him early on in his career, and I was wrong. He's great. The secondary stuff is playing up way better than it was early in the career, and I think that he's a legitimate ace and will be for a long time. And I would happily take him over Cole right now if I had a draft.
I mean, yeah.
Let's talk about another slider, and this is the Lance McCullers slider. So he added it this year. He's now up to using the slider 29.3%, mostly at the expense of his sinker, which is down 12.4%. Mike, McCullers has always been the quote unquote the curveball guy. Right. So is featuring this slider a good thing for McCullers, or do you think that he maybe needs to go back to that curve?
I'm wondering if less is more with McCullers as of right now. We're seeing the pitch it's been first off, where did it come from? I don't remember him even talking about throwing it. Now he's throwing it the second most of any pitch in his arsenal. Or tied for the second most.
Slider, young sir.
Exactly, and it's been great in terms of it's if you look again, if you're just looking at how players aren't hitting it, I should say, but his walks have gone up.
Yeah, I never understood that. I was completely when we were talking about this, and Eric was telling me about him throwing the slider. I said to myself, why? I was like, his freaking curve was insane. Why would he junk it? Not junk it, but why would he think he needs to throw? Maybe he's throwing another wrinkle, but like to me, me and my brother were talking about this too. He was like, well, maybe he's trying to get less stress on his arm. And I'm like, a slider is really not going to do that for you. You're not going from like a slider or curve to a changeup, which is, you know, where you get less stress. Like, so to me, like, I really don't understand what was the need for his slider. Like, if it was me, I would have went with something more off speed rather than more breaking ball. But
and I'm surprised because I mean, you look at the slider, and I'm just looking at the movement profile a little bit, and it does move a different direction than both the cutter, the sinker, and the curve. So it does add another wrinkle. Plus, he was only a 2-pitch pitcher anyway. Right. So McCullers needed a third pitch. You know, that's that stress, like in terms of that third pitch to make him an ace. I like the potential, but that pitch isn't the problem right now. And I don't know, he's just not locating anything well. I mean, you have 5 walks per 9. That's not going to get it done. And the strikeout rate's pretty much in line with 2020 strikeout rate. So although this pitch has been good for McCullers, it hasn't been difference making enough to shift. Like, I don't understand why. Like, I guess he honestly should probably focus on that command and control before he should have added this other pitch, because now all this is a third pitch that seems like it's not helping with other bigger issues. And like I said, control being the biggest one. And he's actually inducing so far, McCullers is inducing a career low O swing percentage, a career low swing and strike rate. The lowest swing strike rate since 2015, which was his rookie year. So he's not getting the swings and misses. He's not getting the chases. So is the slider really doing him any favors? That's kind of what I'm wondering. It's like, it looks like he attacks his zone pretty well with it, but he's not getting by on other stuff. Maybe I don't. There's more digging is needed here.
Yeah, I think it's pretty insane that he's thrown 3 of those pitches: the curve, the slider, and I guess his sinker, all same amount of pitches. Like, it's pretty insane the kind of distribution that he's got there.
Yeah, and I think, you know, for me, when I watch him, it almost looks like he's using the slider as a substitution for a fastball. Which makes sense when you look at the fact that the sinker usage dropping is the biggest change in the other direction. I mean, times where you're like, okay, this is a fastball count, especially to a right-handed batter, he's throwing the slider, which means there must be – what that tells me is that there's something where he was thinking that especially against righties, that the sinker was a little bit of a liability for him. And that's why he's using the slider. You know, he's thrown 110 sliders and 97 have been to righties. So he's using that as a strike pitch against right-handed hitters. And I watched, you know, he got into trouble against the Angels in his last start in like the 6th inning. And if you look at that, he went 3-2 on pretty much everybody in that inning. And it was slider, 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 slider. When it was a lefty up, it was curve, 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 curve. And he wasn't always, to Mike's point, he wasn't always locating it, but he kept going to those breaking pitches and not to some version of the fastball. So what that tells me is that, you know, despite the fact that, you know, the sinker isn't a massive problem for him right now, he doesn't seem to have a confidence in it, or he believes that using the slider is better for his overall profile. If you look at, you know, Alex Chamberlain's pitch leaderboard, the slider currently has a 24% walk percentage. It has a 14.2 deserved walk percentage. So, you know, maybe that will regress to the mean a little bit, but it is the pitch he is having the most trouble locating, which makes sense because it's his newest pitch. But, you know, on one hand, it's like, I like it. It adds a different wrinkle. On the other hand, dear God, man, I cannot watch you pitch more 3-2 counts. It gives me so much stress.
Dear God, man. Although I'm wondering if this pitch has affected his changeup, because although his changeup wasn't anything that we like talked about often when it came to McCullers, it was decent last year. It wasn't anything special, but you know, it had more whiffs last year. It was more effective. This year, he's being hit tremendously hard on that changeup. 500 batting average against it, a 500 slugging. The WOBA is 582 with the next WOBA pretty much in line with that, and he's only getting 14.3% whiff rate on that changeup compared to last year, which again I was mentioning he used it 8% more of the time, almost 3 times as many whiffs, and was keeping hitters around 200 batting average again. So what happened to that changeup? Why is it less effective? Did the grip of the slider and the throwing of the slider mess with that changeup a little bit? And if you look at it, the changeup mirrors, going back to mirroring, the changeup mirrors the slider pretty well.
Yeah.
So you would think it would even be more effective, being that he's throwing so many sliders. But maybe there's also probably less of a velo difference between the changeup and slider. But still, being that they move completely opposite directions, you would think maybe it would still have the effectiveness to it because they should look similar if they have similar velo, right? But no. Maybe they're not mirroring. Maybe they're not tunneling well. That would take a whole other discussion because just because they mirror well doesn't mean they're tunneling well. Because that they kind of have to go hand in hand. For some people, I might not realize. People here talk about mirroring and tunneling. They need to go hand in hand for them to work as super effective. But maybe they're not. I don't know. But the changeup itself, I'm noticing, is not doing its job for McCullers, and that could be something that once he fixes, it will all click. Because you're throwing a pitch 10% of the time, and if you look at the heat map on this changeup, I don't think it ever hits the zone. Just look at the heat map. It doesn't it literally it's red 3 feet outside the zone right now looking at it. So I don't know what's going on there. And that's supposed to be his other pitch that he throws to what, right? He's lefties. Sorry.
Right. Lefties. Yeah. And if you, again, looking at the heat map, the slider, you're a little bit all over the place, but you're also dead in the middle for the most part, which again backs up the fact that he's using it as more of like a fastball type pitch, not as a swing and miss pitch. Personally, I like the addition of the slider as a concept because I think what it does to his arsenal creates a little bit more differentiation and gives him another way to attack hitters and makes him, effective to both righties and lefties. And I think it gives him an extra level of ceiling. But that command of that pitch has to improve as the year goes on, or he's going to struggle with walks, which means he's not going to pitch deep into games. And he's going to get blown up sometimes because he's going to have too many runners on base. And, we're already kind of seeing that sometimes. So, I think we got to keep an eye on the command of that pitch as it goes on into the year. Let's talk about let's move away from sliders. And let's move to a slider adjacent pitch. Let's talk about Jacob Junis for a second and the new cutter. He started throwing a cutter this year. It's up. He throws it at 33.7%. It has basically substituted for what was a below average fastball. And now he's moved his way into from a multi-inning relief role into the Kansas City Royals rotation at the moment. Sammy, do you see anything to get excited about for Jacob Junis, or is this just cool? He has a new pitch. I want no part of it.
Yeah, I remember years ago when he came, I was kind of intrigued by this dude, just because I felt like he was like this tall, lanky kind of guy. But I don't know if it's enough to get me interested in. I'm not really interested in guys that these low velo guys that don't have a put away pitch, so to speak. And it's great that he's trying to figure something else out and adding this cutter. What is he? He's throwing it at 83 miles an hour. That's pretty insane that he's using a cutter at 83 miles an hour. I'm not. I'm okay. I'll pass on Jacob Junis. Thank you very much.
Mike, you see anything different? Anything to get excited about?
When I saw 83 miles per hour, I thought it was I'm like, there's no way this is classified as a cutter. I thought it was a slider for sure. I was like, and I thought, so I double or triple checked it because when I'm learning about the pitch mix chart, Velo, I guess on the back end of Savant, they'll prioritize a curveball and a knuckle curve differently. So I was over here adding new pitches for 30 new players, realizing, right. It's been recategorized. It might be categorized one way or the another behind on the back end, but then on the actual page, it only shows up as a curveball. So I thought, and then sometimes with the cutter and the slider, you'll get two different data sets. It's classified as the same pitch depending on the pitcher. So I really have double checked pretty much every pitcher, and I've double checked Junis 4 times. I'm waiting for them to reclassify this cutter as a slider, but that's just me rambling at this point. I'm looking at he's due for regression on the fastball. The changeup's been getting hit hard. The singer's been getting hit hard. So you're telling me he's a one-pitch pitcher? He's probably going to end up back in the bullpen sooner than later. It's fun to ride the hot hand. Didn't he start against the Pirates tonight? Or was that yesterday? Or I'm trying to remember when he started last. We can look that up. I think he might even – was it – I think it's supposed to – it was today, I think. It was, and he went 6 strong with 9 Ks.
Of course.
on just 84 pitches, by the way.
Right.
So
I mean,
I'm just
do we use the Pirates as an excuse for that, or no?
I think he's a stream. I think Junis is a great stream option. You might want to hold on to him in case I'm wrong, or in case Sammy and I are both wrong.
We don't know what the hell we're talking about.
But it's Junis is a guy, like, I think, didn't he just burn us on his last start, I believe? So I remember his last start wasn't great, if I remember correctly. Yeah. So regardless, so Junis is a guy that's definitely in streamer territory, but there's nothing I don't see other than the cutter that's been fantastic. Once that's figured out, what happens, you know?
Yeah.
Players are going to figure it out eventually. Big league hitters are great. They're in the big leagues for a reason. This has been a fun little. I think this is smoke and mirrors right now.
He gave up 5 runs over 5 innings against Tampa Bay.
Yeah, I knew. Yeah, because I started him. I know. I knew he had a bad start.
Nothing worse than an expert scoring.
And to your point, it was like, he added a new pitch, he added a cutter, but then he basically stopped throwing the slider. So he went from being a 2-pitch pitcher last year to being a 2-pitch pitcher this year, but just with a different second pitch. And even the start you're talking about tonight against the Pirates, 91% of his pitches were either 4-seam or cutter. He got 4 whiffs on the 4-seam. He got 8 whiffs on the cutter. The cutter actually had a 44% CSW. It basically comes down to, for me, like, I actually think the cutter is a good pitch. I watch it and I like it as a pitch, but he doesn't have anything else around it. When I watched him in the spring, I actually liked that he was throwing the cutter and the slider, because there's 6-mile-an-hour difference between the two, and the cutter is more of a sharp break and the slider has a little bit more of a hump. So it's not like they kind of attack the same part of the plate. So it's nothing like that would make a drastic difference, but it gives a different look, and it would probably keep hitters a little bit more off balance. But he abandoned that slider altogether and still has, a relatively below average fastball, and now just a slightly better second pitch. So if you want to do that dance, fine. Justin Mason and I were talking about it yesterday. It's like, it's still early in the season. I know that we all are worried about innings and we're trying to stream, but then you get Gombered like people did last night. And I think that, like, we don't need to go crazy with streamers. Make sure you're also streaming guys that have either an exceptional matchup or great talent. And Junis is a 2-pitch pitcher, and we got to make sure he's in the right situation if you're going to use him, is my opinion.
Indeed.
A guy I'm actually a little bit more excited about than I thought I would be coming into this is Chris Flexen. We call him KBO Chris in the Rotoballer message board, because when there was no baseball and we all just started staying up late at night and covering the KBO, we were watching a bunch of Chris Flexen. And he came back to the majors and was featuring his cutter. He was like almost 60% 4-seam fastball when he left, and he came back, was throwing his cutter more. The cutter is a relatively good pitch that he keeps low. The fastball is still not great. But for me, I think the big difference is that he's limiting his worst pitch, which is his 4-seam fastball. He's being more kind of cutter focused, and the command is better. And I think, I talked about this a little bit when I did a video on Chris Flexen this morning, is like, you go to the KBO where they don't get by on overpowering hitters. They get by on stuff, and they get by on placement, and they get by on, their pitch mix and pitch sequencing. And he's 26, right?
So
like, he's not
become a pitcher.
Yeah, he learned how to become a pitcher because he has a 92-mile-an-hour fastball, which, he runs up to 94, but that's not going to overpower anybody. But, now he's keeping the cutter low, the 4-seamer up. He's got a pretty good 12-6 curve. I think if you're good, I would much rather stream Chris Flexen than I would Jacob Junis.
Let's say.
Yeah, I think there's more here.
How dare the KBO make pitchers pitch? How dare they care about location and pitch types? How dare they?
Plus, listen, he's another guy who left the Mets, so obviously he's going to be better because he left the Mets. That's just what you need to do.
Jeff Kent, aka Jeff Kent. Let's do it.
Well, before we continue, I want to just point out that Vladdy hit his 3rd home run of the night.
I was waiting for an opportunistic time to jump in and throw it in.
Three tonight.
Three tonight,
dude. I was off. Yeah. I have 0 shares. I was off too. I was wrong.
Yeah, but what are the launch angles though?
I can look this up real quick.
Come on, dude.
His average launch angle is up like 4 degrees this year right now. By the way, for what it's worth.
No, listen. We talked about it. I want to see it. You know, as much as I was saying to Sammy, I wasn't sure it was going to happen. I'm happy if it happens because having another
close. You had me this close to trading him this offseason.
Well, I did tell you it depended on the offer you got because his prospect stock was still high.
It is funny. So he's hit 3 balls tonight over 108 miles per hour, and one of them was a ground out, of course. But the home runs were a 20-degree launch angle, 26 and 25.
My man.
Two of which went over 400 feet because he is a beast of a man.
Yes.
Somehow both of these pitches went over 400 feet, 415 and 436, and their XBAs were not 1,000. Like, I don't know how they were less than perfect, but okay. Anyway,
we'll take the runs and the 7 RBI.
But back to Chris Flexen. So much more fun to talk about, right?
That's what people came to listen to.
Yeah, yes. Chris Flexen. Dude, he's doing his best Mikolas impression, it feels like.
That's the guy that came to mind was Miles Mikolas
that's usable. He's very usable. Yeah. He's more valuable in your deeper formats, Flexen is. And dude, the fastball though, I know he's trying to use it up, but he's definitely catching too much of the zone, and that's why it's getting crushed. He needs a fastball. I get it, but dude, honestly, like look at the rest of his pitches. There's like a high floor there. He has the curveball, the changeup, both of which have been okay. Nothing special, just good. Good pitches, fallback pitches. He's able to throw them to both sides of. It's nice because he actually throws them both against. A little changeup more against lefties, the curveball a little more against righties. But he doesn't necessarily just throw it against those lefties and righties. He's willing to throw it to all hitters. So that gives that adds a little bit to that floor. And I guess that's what Flexen is more of a floor play. And I agree. He's in that Junis conversation, but Flexen, I believe, has longer term staying power than Junis. Now that I said that, Flexen is about to get bombed his next start, and Junis is going to keep doing what he did tonight. But I agree with the Flexen with it feels like very Miles Mikolas. He's barely walking anyone. He's pitching. His ground ball rate is 50%, so he's keeping the ball on the ground. The strikeouts are whatever, like 21.6% is not bad, but it's just. And if you look, he's not getting a lot of swinging strikes. So 8.5% swinging strike rate, about league average on the chase rate. He is. He's just a guy. But
yeah. But listen, he had 63 total major league innings before this year. So I think he's not a finished product. Nobody should be super excited, but I don't think we should write him off as the typical stigma of like, oh, he had to go to Korea. Like he was 25, made the decision to go play baseball overseas, came back a better player.
Yeah,
and he pitched 116 innings last year in the KBO, so maybe he won't be as limited with the innings as maybe he'll get you 150, which adds some value with the floor he's bringing. So,
let's move to another guy who I think is already on every single roster, but is I think taking a step up to be a little bit more of a dependable fantasy. Maybe not ace, but maybe borderline fantasy ace. And we're talking about Sandy Alcantara, who is another Marlins pitcher who's featuring a changeup more than in the past. His changeup usage is up 12.1%. Sammy, we've talked a lot about the Marlins and the way they develop. They feature changeups. Are you buying into Sandy Alcantara taking another step here?
Yes. I've always wondered why this guy wasn't better than he actually is. Like, I felt like he's been mediocre, but just when I watch him pitch, I'm like, dude, this guy needs to be better. Like, he should be better. His stuff is good. The changeup is great. It keeps it down in the zone, keeps it out of the zone. It's really an effective pitch, and the fact that he's using it more is encouraging. And he does have velo. He used to be primarily a ground ball pitcher, but now he's getting whiffs. So I mean, like a guy who's kind of had the ground ball ability to find his way to get swings and misses. That's what you want, right? You want swings and misses and guys putting the ball on the ground. And he was primarily a ground ball guy. So now getting the other part to it, I'm all in. Sandy Alcantara is legit.
Mike?
Oh yeah, I'm a Marlins fan. I know I'm wearing the Mariners hat, but I'm a Marlins fan, and it's nice to see him making these changes to get these strikeouts. I mean, to get these whiffs. He's putting the fastball. He's throwing more fastballs this year as well, and he's putting them up in the zone. Plays well with the changeup. And you're going to give me a guy who has Sandy Alcantara was he's a floor guy. You know, he was always this high floor. You can get him as your SP4, SP3, and you knew you were going to get that. Set him and forget him. I think Alcantara still brings that, but now offers that SP2 upside. And that's a huge difference. I won't say he's a fantasy ace because that's honestly a very tough thing to do. He's entering that place in the draft where, you know, that 15th to 20th overall range, I would think, like, you know, maybe like a Hyun-Jin Ryu type. He's kind of entering that area for me. And that's very valuable considering you were getting Alcantara as your SP3, SP4 in some leagues. And I think this is who he's going to be, though. He has that high ceiling, he has a high floor with what was a low ceiling, but now it's like more of a medium ceiling in my opinion now. So I like him. And I think he's safe. The injuries there hasn't been much injury concerns with him. There's not much to add there. I just think that he's just solid, and I'm trying not to be a little bit of like, I don't usually let my bias get to me, so I don't want to sound biased, but I just think that he's still underappreciated. I don't know if people understand just how good that this boring of a pitcher is.
Yeah, I think it's hard when a guy's been in Major League Baseball for a while. Like, you know, he's been here.
Feels like it.
Yeah, it feels like he's been here for a long time, right? And I think his initial first couple of years or so, like, you kind of got this book on him that he was kind of like an okay pitcher. So see someone kind of explode to the next level, you know, you're kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop. But yeah, I mean, all it takes is a little tweak, right? Like, you find that change up, you kind of find a way to use something different. Yeah,
and you throw 98, 97, like like
those were there.
And to me, I think it's also kind of evidence of the fact that changeups just aren't sexy. Because if a guy was taking a leap because he started throwing a nasty slider 13% more, 14% more, and there were gifs of it everywhere, and, you know, there was all this kind of pitching ninja stuff, everybody'd be like, "Oh, did you see his new slider?" There are very few people, even though, like, I think Sammy and I would agree with you, Mike, that a changeup is probably the most important pitch in baseball, one of the most important pitches a pitcher can have. You know, unless you're throwing a Devin Williams changeup, there aren't people who are running to watch videos of your changeup.
I know, and that's unfortunate because there are some really beautiful changeups out there.
Yeah. Listen, I might have to make a video of just real sexy changeups.
Pablo Lopez, start there. You'll find
it's like the Marlins. I mean, the Marlins, their pitching development, Sammy and I talked about it before, and we were talking about Trevor Rogers before the season even started. Their pitching development does a tremendous job in getting guys to throw good, consistent swing and miss changeups. And it makes these guys, it raises the floor of all of these guys. And because Alcantara also has a really good slider, it gives them a higher ceiling as well.
I'm going to ask because I have never done any research into this. Maybe you guys have more information, but I feel like a changeup would be the easiest breaking ball / off-speed pitch, whatever you want to call it, to command of a breaking ball and off-speed pitch. I mean, maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't know. It just feels like it because when you look at a grip of a changeup,
you're throwing it like a fastball. You're not really.
That's kind of what I'm saying. Like, maybe a circle change is a little uncomfortable, but even then, most of your hand is on the pitch. You know,
it's just a grip thing, really.
So I'm wondering, is there something to that? Would you say it's easier to throw a changeup with effectiveness and accuracy than most other off-speed pitches?
I think so. I mean, I think it's easier to throw it with accuracy. I think the issue is just how much movement are you also trying to get on it, right?
Gotcha.
When you're starting people out throwing changeups, like when you're talking about high school age, and early on in college, you're getting somebody used to throwing a changeup. You're not really thinking about like, oh, I want it to run. I want it to, run away from a hitter a lot. I want it to dive down a lot. You're just looking for velocity differentiation.
Mm-hmm.
As you get older, now it can't be a slower fastball because now it needs to do something else.
Right.
So, if you don't have other pitches in the repertoire that can offer variation in movement. So you need to get movement from your changeup. Now you need to play around with the grip. So now you're not just throwing, a slower version of a fastball in the bottom of the zone. Now you also need it to like dive in on a right-handed hitter, and you're messing with the grip of that, and maybe now you're losing command of it or control of it.
Gotcha. So yeah, that makes sense. All right.
And it's why, we talked about this and we were talking to Greg Jewett with like Cesar Valdez. He has like 4 different versions of his changeup. He turns it over, he runs it away, he bores it down and in.
It's basically 4 pitches with just one off of one pitch.
Right. It just shows how versatile that pitch is.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing is you won't be able to get that information without watching it or diving into him, because if you look at his Savant page, it's going to show one pitch and it's going to show how it moves. But I don't even think the movement data, is it just based on, are they taking it all together and putting it out there? Or are they just taking one way?
Classifying that changeup that kind of runs away maybe as something else.
Yeah.
We have no idea. They could be classifying it as a cutter. Who knows? I mean,
I do think
a cutter. I mean, it's possible.
I do think Savant is really good about. I think and somebody might know this. I'm pretty sure Savant classifies pitches as the pitcher does. So they'll actually find out what a pitcher calls a pitch and use that. Whereas I think Brooks Baseball classifies it as they see it fit. Like I bet you, if we go look at Brooks Baseball and we go look at Junus's pitch mix, it might call his slider a cutter, or whichever one. It'll probably call the cutter a slider on Brooks Baseball, but Savant, Junis has called it a cutter, so Savant calls it a cutter as well.
Yeah,
I'll look that up actually.
You see that differentiation a lot. Samuel, while Mike's looking that up, let's talk about a Yankee. Do you have any hope for improvement for Jameson Taillon? This is his first year with the Yankees, obviously his first year coming back from a myriad of injuries, and he's definitely a guy that we're all rooting for. The big reason he's on here in terms of his pitch mix change is the fact that he is throwing his four-seam fastball almost 25% more. You watch pretty much every game that he's started. Do you feel like there's anything to get excited about?
No.
I mean, that hurts me. I was such a Taillon
guy. I just don't get the increased usage in the fastball when it's been so mediocre since he's been throwing it. I mean, he's got hitters are batting 303 against it. Granted, that's with an XBA of 169. But I mean, they're slugging 636. I mean, they're slugging 636 against your fastball. And he's throwing it more than ever. And his slider, which was a good pitch, he's actually decreased the usage. So, see, this is where, changing.
Garrett Cole got in his ear.
Yeah, this is where changing your pitch mix sometimes is actually not a good thing. When you're trying to force. I don't know if he's trying to force the fastball. It's actually he's throwing it, a tick below what he threw it in 2019, I think. He was at 94.7, and now he's at 93.5. So he's throwing it slower. It's getting hit harder, and he's throwing it more. So that's like a recipe for disaster.
He did mention in spring training he wanted or was going to throw the fastball more. So he's a man of his word. So you give that man respect, all right?
Yeah,
but
sure.
Put some respect on his name.
But yes, that's not a good mix. And unfortunately, as much as I want to buy back into Taillon, I'm with you. He's probably a drop for me. But who you're dropping him for? It's the Chris Flexens of the world. It's like
I guess if the Yankees isn't bailing him out, I mean, I don't know.
I'm still willing to hold. What I do like about the fastball is how consistently up in the zone it is, and I do think that will help the slider. So I like that he's kind of using the top of the zone and the bottom of the zone. But I don't know that we need to make this jump to throwing the fastball over 50% of the time. Right. I think if the fastball's up or there, that's awesome. Let's dial back on the use of the fastball a little bit.
Yep.
Let's up the use of the slider, which we had before. Slider curve off of that fastball. I think that can be a decent mix for him. Yeah. On a what will I still believe, even though I don't like the Yankees, I still believe will be a good offense that's going to put up runs at the end of the year and should give him an opportunity to get some wins.
And to revisit real quick, Brooks Baseball isn't up to date yet. They haven't gone in there and updated it. But when they do, just be mindful for anyone listening. If you are interested, brooksbaseball.net is a really good underutilized source in terms of pitching data. But they do differentiate like how they view pitches from Savant. So that can be a little, you gotta just be mindful of that. I like to remind people of that because it's a good source of, it's a good place to look up some data, but just there's differences in what you're going to find, discrepancies, so to speak. So
last arm we're going to look at today is Jesus Luzardo. So Jesus Luzardo on the surface is off to a rough start to the year. He has a 5.40 ERA across 5 starts. He's upped the fastball usage to 26.7%. He's currently throwing the fastball 57.6%, and that has been drastically at the expense of his sinker, which he basically doesn't throw anymore. But he's also limited the use of the curveball and the changeup. However, his K per 9 has jumped from 9 to 10.44, and the K percentage went up from 23% to 26%, which is minimal, but is still an increase. Mike, do you think that Jesus Luzardo is going to live up to the kind of hype that we created for him? Do we think we created an animal and some outsized expectations for the young pitcher?
I think we might be a year away, or he figures it out by the second half type of thing. But I do think Luzardo very much is or can be the ace we expect him to be in terms of fantasy. It's just a matter of when he gets there, right? I mean, if you look at it, you mentioned on the year it looks kind of rough, but he has back-to-back quality starts for what it's worth, coming off the it's really rough. Well, he had 12 earned runs in his first 3 starts and 3 combined in his last 2, and that's been at Baltimore and home against Minnesota. So and believe it or not, Baltimore was the team that hit him for the 3 runs, not Minnesota. But you just never know with those Orioles, especially in Camden. But it's not warm weather yet. Regardless, my point is there's he's been better of late, and it's just something to monitor. He might have honestly already kind of made some adjustments, and that's why he's had some better starts lately. But Luzardo is very much a guy that I believe in the pedigree. I believe in the athletics to kind of mold him to be decent, at least, or to be the ace that he can be. The Athletics want to get the most they can out of a guy before they trade him or let him go, right? So I think they're gonna do what they can with him in terms of getting the best out of him. But I don't know. I still believe in Luzardo, the talent and the pedigree myself personally.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, Mike. I love this kid. I just think he's got to figure out not to be hard all the time. Get too hard with his fastball, but yeah, I love the talent.
Yeah, I think I love the talent too. I'm not disagreeing with either of you guys on that. I would love to see the changeup and the curveball usage tick back up a little bit more and not be so over reliant on the 4-seam. You mentioned the last start against the Orioles. The last start against the Orioles threw the fastball 45% of the time, changeup 30%, curveball 21%. The CSW on the curve was 38. The changeup was 37. So he's starting to utilize those pitches a little more. He's getting more whiffs on those pitches, at least in that start. So again, he's 23, which I think is surprising. I mean, I know we all know he's young, but he does feel like he's a name that we've been talking about for a while. He's still a young kid who's still learning a little bit, not just his pitch mix, but also how to attack major league hitters. I mean, last year was the most innings he's thrown against major league hitters, and he had threw 59 innings. That's nothing. So he still has to learn how to attack and adjust. And if you're in a league and somebody is kind of hesitant on Jesus Luzardo or thinks that maybe he's been overhyped in a way, I'd be buying. I feel like the second half of the year is going to be much better.
Yep.
Yeah, it's weird. I'm looking at his per game usage as well. And that changeup, he has thrown it exclusively to right-handed hitters for what it's worth.
Yeah.
But at least he's throwing the curveball to both sides of the plate. So I mean, at least it's almost like he attacks lefties with 2 pitches and he'll attack righties with 3. So maybe if it's a lefty heavy lineup, you avoid knowing that he's going to only be throwing 2 pitches most of the time.
Yeah, I think it depends. It's that's one of those things where we see over the course of the career if he winds up creating any splits.
Oh, I'm just saying short term more so than
Yeah.
anything. Hey, I'm not saying this isn't a long term concern. It's more of like hey, I noticed this is happening. Maybe we be mindful. Or if he has a blow up start, let's look at the lineup he played. Oh, it's all lefties. Cool. He's adjusting because he's not throwing much of a diversification in terms of pitch mix against them. It's pretty much almost exclusively 4-seam curveball against lefties. Whereas he mixes his sinker pretty much all 4 pitches in against righties, and that's a big difference. So he's like, if we go look at his even on the year, I'll go look it up his splits. He's probably performing better against righties. Yes, he is so far. 20 points less average against. The Woba is a little only 4 points lower, but less
his lefty with his stuff would have trouble with lefties.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. He has reverse splits right now.
Yeah.
Like, what the hell's going on? But anyway.
Yeah.
So we talked about the rebound with Luzardo. So we're going to move into calling pitches. We're going to be short and quick with this one. We're each going to give one guy who we think is struggling or maybe just kind of forgotten middle of the pack right now, who we think will be helping fantasy teams by the end of the year. Sammy, I don't know if you want to change your pick right now based on where we were before we started. Who are you going with?
I'm going to stick with Kenta Maeda. I think this is basically a rough patch where he's trying to figure things out. I think he's definitely lost a feel for his slider, and I think less sliders and more changeups. Would a change to that pitch mix would help because his changeup was pretty good last year. So I'm hoping that a veteran arm like Maeda is going to figure it out. I still think that there's good innings left in that arm, and it's just a matter of him finding that slider and using that changeup a little bit more.
I want to believe I bought in a lot of places, and so I want to believe you. Yeah. I'm keeping the faith.
I want to believe me too.
Mike, who's your guy? Who do you think by the end of the year will be saying, I'm happy I stuck with him, or I'm happy I went out and grabbed him?
Oh, man, I know this is going to burn me the second I open my mouth and say it, but I am going to say we are all going to look back and think we are foolish for not drafting him or even ranking him. I guarantee you nobody here and said they're top 100, and we were all wrong. It's Carlos Rodon. I'm in. I can't. I'm a glutton for punishment. The velo's up. He looks electric, and sometimes you just watch a picture and you're like, wow, all clicking on all cylinders. It's only a month in, so I'm really trying to not get overly excited, but he's looking every bit the ace that he was always expected to become. I'm not saying he's going to be an ace fully, but Rodon comes with that prospect pedigree. He was the number 3 overall pick. Injuries have been an issue. He's pitching for a contract. He's in a division that's pretty favorable for him as well, with his offense being one of the offenses you want to avoid in that division. So Rodon's a guy that I'm just gonna. I know it's gonna burn. It's gonna burn me, but I'm in.
Yeah, no, I think he's good. I think the only thing that's ever held him back has been the injuries. That's really been the only thing. But I like Rodon too, man. I think
it's like
I'm fully in too. I think it's a great call, which means we're probably making it even more likely that you're going to get burned on it. But I think he's looked like a totally different pitcher this year. I think the added velo has helped not only with his fastball but with his breaking pitches as well. Yeah, I love it.
And if you look at the heat map on that fastball, he's like keeping it up in the zone exclusively and like barely fluctuating from where he puts it. Like that heat map is like it's one little dot, and he's able to keep that slider off the plate and hit the edges and keep the changeup low in the zone. Almost like he's been control. His control's been better than I could have anticipated as well. The problem is it's a long season. Right. Can Rodon? It's not even health. Can he just sustain the velo gains? Can he sustain the control? These are things that
I told Eric that he looks like he's in much better shape than I remember seeing him in previous years.
I mean, pitching for a contract, man.
Yeah, he looks like he got into really good shape. So hopefully that pushes him through the season.
Could he be this year's Corbin Burns?
I mean, that's
possible.
But yeah, I definitely think he's a number. He can be a number 2.
You got to remember where Burns Burns was a guy that no one had ranked inside the top 100, came out looking electric, had this same like, wow, where'd this come from? Similar pedigree. Everyone thought highly of him coming up. And then this year we're seeing Burns take another step. I'm not saying Rodon will take that ace step that Burns is taking now, but I'm talking about 2020 version of Burns where came out of nowhere, was fantasy relevant all year, and selling high was the wrong move if you drafted Burns. I'm having a hard time selling high on Rodon because pitching has been tough, but people always ask, well, I want to buy low, I want to sell high. I personally have a hard time buying low and selling high because I tend to want to just see where this goes. I'm willing to miss out on selling high in case this turns out to be that'll burn me 90% of the time. But I really want to see where a guy like Rodon goes. Now obviously I'm not going to turn down, like if I could package Rodon and go out and get a struggling Scherzer, I'll do that. But it's going to take me packaging. Like, I'm not going to just go out and give Rodon for, I don't know. It's just when it gets hard. Like, do I want Plesac right now? Not really. Like, he looked a little better. He looked a little better yesterday, but still not what we were hoping for when we drafted Plesac. And at this point, let me just take my shots on the upside type of thing.
I think you got to have faith in your guys too. Like if you're in on him, then you should ride it out, right? Because the worst thing is to be in on a guy and get rid of him thinking you're going to get out before it gets bad. And then it doesn't. And you're like, I like him. I believed in him. And I overthought myself. I made a stupid decision.
Eovaldi.
Eovaldi, yes, basically. Yeah. Though to be fair, I think I might rather have Rodon right now than Eovaldi.
Yes, I agree with that.
So, and my guy is we're giving love to the changeup, and we're giving love to Eduardo Rodriguez's changeup, and I think Rodriguez is a little bit of a forgotten guy. He didn't pitch at all last year. Obviously, he contracted COVID and had a pretty serious heart condition as a side effect of it, to the point where, when they were in the off season, there was a story that he was able to walk, was kind of like doctors had cleared him to begin walking. So he was basically just kind of like fully, prevented from doing any sort of activity because of the strain that it would put on his heart. I believe the condition is myocarditis, if I remember correctly. So it was pretty serious. So the fact that he's back and throwing in and of itself is something that I think is impressive, and I'm happy to see it. But I think he's also been throwing well. He's increased the usage of his changeup and dialed back on the usage of the fastball, and that may be also kind of like a stamina thing and a health thing. He had a little bit of a dead arm coming out of spring. His fastball is currently down 1 mile per hour from what it was in 2019. So maybe he's adjusting the approach after not having a full tank of gas. But the changeup is a good pitch, so I have no problem with him throwing it more. And then he scrapped the curveball and actually upped his slider usage, and also increased the vertical movement on his slider. He added 10 inches of drop to the slider. And he's not throwing it a bunch right now. He's only throwing it 9% of the time, but I watch it and I'm intrigued by it. And I wonder if it's a pitch that as he begins to gain a little more confidence with, we begin to see it become a little bit more of a part of his repertoire as he goes on in the year. And I think you're looking at a pitcher who, is pitching well on a good team or an offense that's proving that they're going to be a lot better than people thought they were. And he's always been relatively consistent. And I think that, you may see another level of swing and miss to his game this year. And hopefully another level of consistency because, he's made ridiculous strides early on with his command. But again, it's super early, but he's got a 2.2% walk rate, which is giving him a 27% K- walk rate, which would be phenomenal if he could keep up that command rate.
It's also coming with a 12.5% swinging strike rate and a 36.1% O swing, which are obviously you see I harp on chases and I harp on swinging strikes, and he's getting both, which are both career best to this point. So it comes with, and you mentioned that slider. I'm looking at it. It's almost like he junked the curve and fixed the grip of the slider, made it more of a slurve.
Yeah,
it was more of a slurve.
It's like he combined them a little bit.
So it's not a slurve.
not a
It's
slaughter.
not a
No.
slaughter. It's not a
And
slaughter.
let's
No.
be clear. Eric just said he was intrigued by 10 inches of drop.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I did.
Well, you could have just stopped. He's intrigued by 10 inches.
Right.
Period.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I this is a PG show.
It,
and I have to
it
make-
increased 10 inches, and I got excited.
Yes.
Which
Vertical
is,
movement too.
Yes,
That's,
right. Which I think is the perfect way to wrap up our show for the week. Mike, do you want to tell everybody remind everybody where they can find your stuff?
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on. It was a lot of fun. Love talking baseball. Appreciate it. And you can follow me on Twitter at Mike_Kurland. You can find me my podcast, Spaces Loaded Pod, on anywhere you listen to podcasts. And yeah, I don't know, just Twitter is where I do most of my stuff. I put all my content on there, so I'm always on there.
Go
Mike's
use
a real good.
show. Go use it.
Oh yeah,
Yes.
that thing too. I'm really
Use
bad
the pitch.
self-promoting.
Mike's a really good Twitter follow too. He's kind of always out there throwing out ideas and taking feedback. So follow his stuff. Let him know what you like about it. And
Please let me know what you don't like. That's actually way more useful.
Yeah.
True.
Serious.
Same thing with us. Rate and review the podcast. Let us know what you like and don't like, so we can keep making it better. You can follow me at Samsky NYC. You can see my stuff on Rotoballer as well, including some pitch mix videos and deep dives that I do. And Mike and I spend time talking about like Adobe Premiere effects and nerding out over like, how did you make that color shine like that? They're great conversations.
I mean, if I give people my Twitter handle, they'll probably tell me why I can't up my game to Eric's background. Like, Eric's got this beautiful brick background with the pictures. And we got
jail cells.
Yeah, I know.
we're prisoners.
What's going on? Like, okay.
I have a fan, a black table, and
right. Well, you're probably worse than I am, but
well, no, you have a light.
Yeah. Eric wins.
Yes.
Listen, I didn't know that this would eventually be my office from a pandemic when we moved in here, but it's worked out well.
Yeah,
so
looks great.
Mike, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Yep. By the way,